Alrighty, hello everybody. My name is Andres Gomez, and I'm here with Taylor Doming as well. And our lunchtime presentation today is going to be on social media and surveillance and taking a holistic approach to gathering information. If after this presentation at any point you have any questions, my email is my first and last name, Andres Gomez @parkerlandry.com, and Taylor's is her first and last name, Taylor Doming @parkerlandry.com. As y'all know, we have offices in Lafayette and Alexandria, but we cover cases all over the state. So oftentimes email is a good way of getting in touch with us, but we also can provide and do provide our cell phone numbers because we're oftentimes, in Shreveport or Monroe or wherever the case may be, covering some hearings or depositions. So if at any point you need to get in touch with us, please feel free to email us, or we'll be happy to provide our cell phone numbers as well.
So jumping right into it, we're first going to start off by kind of giving a little definition to surveillance and what this C will encompass. So what should you consider surveillance? First, private investigators. That's whether it's hired through the adjuster or through the retained attorney. Private investigators are typically third-party companies where they send out skilled and trained private investigators. When I say skilled and trained, that is something to look for when retaining a private investigator for surveillance. Make sure that they have the proper training because in the long run, it protects the claimant and it protects the adjuster and the employer from any, extended litigation in regards to breaking any laws. So it's something to definitely focus on. Private investigators, they obtain video and photographs, whether that's through, video footage that they obtain themselves, by doing almost a stakeout or taking photos the same way. Interactions, some private investigators do interact with the claimant. However, when it comes to interactions, it is something that the adjuster needs to kind of set the ground, just the ground rules for, just so that the private investigator isn't kind of taking the lead and deciding when and where to interact with the claimant. And that is something we're also going to discuss a little later on in the next few slides. Also, some private investigators use drones and hidden cameras. Again, that's something I'm going to discuss further to come. Adjuster's investigation. This is where the adjuster comes in. Believe it or not, the investigations you do at the initiation of a claim is considered surveillance in a way. So that's when a recorded interview is taken, and I believe Patrick and Corey actually did a recorded interview.
Training, yes.
Yes.
Which I believe is on YouTube as well to watch.
Yes, and it is great, and it kind of goes deep into the recorded interview and tips and practices to use. But one thing, just kind of surface level, when it comes to recorded interviews, it's important to get a lot of the preliminary information from that initial contact with the client. It almost boxes them into their story of how the accident happened, when it happened, who was there. This is the best time to get as much information as possible. Some information that you might not think of is like getting their emergency contact. As adjusters, sometimes you'll have a sheet and almost a checklist where you go through it and you ask very certain questions just based upon what was provided in that checklist. However, in order to obtain the most information, it's important to kind of go outside the bounds a little bit, if allowed, and ask questions in a way, as I like to phrase it, almost as like a 3-year-old. When you're talking to a 3-year-old and they're like, why? Well, why? They keep asking why. It's kind of good to use that kind of concept when talking to a claimant because it almost gives a full picture, and you're able to almost paint a picture after they're taking their recorded statement and their recorded interview. Another thing is to definitely get their vehicle they drive, and their address. This will all serve when and if you do decide to hire a private investigator. Also their medical history. And social media is also a tool used for surveillance, which Andres will discuss later.
Yeah, and piggybacking off of what Taylor's talking about here is really typically when you think surveillance, we think private investigators sending a guy or gal out there to take actual footage of the claimant, maybe some pictures here and there. But really you want to think of it holistically as a whole, because the things that you do at the beginning with the recorded interview, the social media search, if you have an SIU team, the things that they do, an ISO report, all of these things build upon each other. And then the result is all of the surveillance, right? So when you consider surveillance holistically as all interconnected to one another, it makes it easier and it increases the likelihood of the a good result with regards to the surveillance. So you really want to think of it, like Taylor said, as a breakdown of many different things that together comprise surveillance, more so than what we just typically think of when somebody says surveillance.
So this quote here, the best time to plan and treat was 20 years ago, the second best time is now. And it is a good quote to apply kind of to the concept of surveillance, that, it's never quite too late to obtain surveillance on a claimant. Despite a claim, you just received a claim and it's been going on for 4 or 5 years. Just because that time has, run does not mean that, it's too late. It's never too late. It's always just a good time to start as soon as you realize that there's a good opportunity to use surveillance to the advantage of the claim. So sooner rather than later is always a good practice. However, like I said, if not sooner than now. So in using a private investigator, it is best to obtain a private investigator to maximize the chances of finding something that's relevant to the claim. For example, if there's a claim that's being litigated and there's potentially fraud, it is good to obtain a private investigator to help in regards to getting information as to fraud. For instance, if a claimant says that, I can't walk, I can't drive, and you would like to get a private investigator to potentially see that claimant is walking outside. In fact, they're cutting their grass and they're driving long distances. You want to have a private investigator basically serve a purpose when it comes to the claim. Just obtaining a private investigator, capturing the claimant doing everyday things that doesn't really serve the claim is almost kind of counterintuitive in a way, because it's an additional expense that doesn't really need to be incurred. So it's best to almost, like I previously said, at the beginning of the claim, lay a foundation and have kind of a guide to go based upon when obtaining a private investigator. Use caution when requesting interaction. Know that when you are seeking private investigators, the adjuster, they kind of lay the guidelines for the investigation. So you lay the framework, you tell them what they're looking for, what you're looking for, how to interact with, if and when to interact with the claimant. For example, Andres had a case where there was a private investigator and he interacted with the claimant by going into a barbershop and getting his hair cut by the claimant. And at the end of the service, he asked, how much do I owe you? And the claimant responded $20 or so. Where in that case, it wasn't a problem that he interacted per se with the claimant. The issue was that, that could potentially arise is that if we wanted to later argue that, the claimant is receiving money, he is being paid for services, even though he says he can't work and he doesn't have an income. Well, the investigator asked, how much do I owe you? And in a way, it almost makes an argument for the claimant that he was almost in a pigeonhole to answering this question. and there can be kind of some litigation surrounding that. So not to say that interaction will always cause issues, but just be cautious and tell your investigator that, if you do want them to interact with the claimant, to kind of let the claimant offer up information. They need to be the ones to volunteer and kind of take lead in the interaction. You don't want to steer them into a certain direction or in any way lead to any further litigation when it comes to just private investigators and interacting with them. Lastly, remote surveillance and drone use. They're becoming more and more popular, especially as technology advances. Remote surveillance, it can be different types. For example, we have an attorney here in the office where he had a claim, and the claimant claimed that he couldn't really walk or do much outdoor activities, and the investigator placed a rock with a camera in the rock in an open field. Well, the camera caught the claimant cutting grass, working outside, etc. Well, the claimant's been living in his home for years, and when he noticed the rock just in the middle of the field, he knew it was out of place, so he ultimately found the camera. So in a way, that's just a good example to show that when using remote surveillance, just make sure that your private investigator is, discreet about it, and don't kind of tip off the claimant into thinking like something is peculiar, especially in that situation where there's a rock in an open field and it's just out of place. And drone use. With drone use, make sure your investigator does not impede upon the claimant's, privacy. So, for example, it's good to use a drone during 4th of July when everybody's out barbecuing in a public area where it would be almost normal to see a drone, but avoid using a drone to, go into someone's backyard and peek through their windows and catch the claimant inside their house. That can raise issues. So once again, when using any of these tools, it's best to kind of weigh your, just take into consideration just privacy and the laws that are in place.
And just piggybacking off of a couple of things here that Taylor said again, when you're looking to maximize the chances to find something, a lot of times we see surveillance be assigned, and the assignment comes through with, please conduct 5 days of surveillance on this individual, here's their address. And really providing more details in the assignment will really help maximize what's found. And so taking an opportunity to say, for example, if you know that the claimant has a doctor's appointment on a particular date, say, look, we want these days, right? These 5 days, 2 days before the doctor's appointment, 2 days after, and the day of the doctor's appointment, because at the very least that the day of the doctor's appointment, if they're going, they're going to be able to be seen by the investigator, right? And that's when it comes into play of all the other groundwork that you've laid, which Taylor will discuss here in a little bit of, with your recorded statement and everything like that. But things like that, when you're sending the assignment, as Taylor said, interactions can be a little tricky, and so you want to be very, very careful how you do that if you request any, although it's very, very rare. Same thing with the remote surveillance and drone use. When you're sending over the assignment, saying things like, look, here's the address, please, they have a doctor's appointment on, Wednesday the 21st, so we would like surveillance to be the 19th, 20th, 21st, 22nd, and 23rd. That way it maximizes the opportunity that you see something. But also keep in mind, and if you have any details of the area that they live in or something like that, to say, look, keep in mind that if you are using remote surveillance, this is mostly a green area where rocks would stand out, or X or Y thing, so that when the private investigator sees the assignment come through, they can look at it and say, oh, okay, well, this is what my approach is going to be, because ultimately the private investigator is going to take the approach that they take, but the input from the adjuster or whoever's sending the assignment will really help bridge the gap of knowledge between just a simple assignment and what we know will maximize the chances of finding information if there's any to find.
So right now we're going to play a little video for you. It's just a little clip kind of to illustrate in a way the importance of getting, surveillance sooner rather than later. In this clip in particular, it was in regard to a claim where the claim was going on about 4 or 5 years, and the claimant said, she couldn't walk and she couldn't drive, etc. However, this is surveillance of her doing exactly those things. So you could just watch.
Yeah, and I'm going to fast forward here a little bit. So if there are any issues, let us know with watching it and we can send you a clip. But essentially, this was a case that was several years old when we received the assignment. One of the first things we looked at was, getting surveillance schedule, because some of the things that were being alleged and activities that were being alleged that could not be done seemed kind of counterintuitive. And so we set this surveillance, and again, these are just short clips, to be able to determine whether or not what they were alleging was consistent with the reality. As you can see, for somebody who was alleging that they couldn't walk, they couldn't really do the activities of daily living, or it was hard for them to walk, they couldn't do the activities of daily living, couldn't really drive, go to the grocery store, things of that nature, surveillance catching this individual doing those things was really something that helped with the case and drive the case forward to a favorable resolution. So those are just two little clips that you can see that having the surveillance is useful, and I'm sure anybody who would be watching this presentation can attest to that. You've had situations where surveillance has revealed some good information, but the sooner you do it, a lot of times is better. That way you're not essentially throwing good money after bad, right? You're not paying benefits for X amount of years before undertaking surveillance.
So investigation, this is where the adjuster's investigation comes in. So going back to the recorded interview, getting the information that will help set the foundation is of the utmost importance just throughout the claim, not just in surveillance, but from the beginning of the claim to the end. It's the framework. So, but in terms of surveillance, it allows the investigator or even an attorney that comes onto the case, it allows them to just know kind of issue spot and know what to look for. So for instance, like we just previously said in the clips, the claimant was claiming to their doctor that, hey, I can't walk, I can't grocery shop, I can't drive. So those are kind of like your red flags, like, okay, well, this is what she's saying she can't do. So I need to let my investigator know, okay, well, look out for activities that of her walking, of her driving, grocery shopping, etc. So those types of questions and getting to know what the claimant can do, it will be of the utmost importance, especially when it comes to getting that surveillance. Again, emergency contact, it can help in terms of, all right, well, as Andres will talk about in a bit, social media, the claimant may not have a social media, but the claimant's wife may have a social media. So, and the claimant's wife may have the claimant on her social media, dancing when they say they could barely walk. So it's always to get those little nuances and that little nuanced information, because it will be helpful in the long run. Which may seem obvious, get their address and ask questions about their address and let them kind of fill in the gaps, especially if you say, like, where do you live? Do you stay there all the time? Do you reside anywhere else from time to time? Questions to kind of just know, like, where should we look for this claimant? For myself, example, I live in Lafayette. However, I'm from New Orleans, and there's times when I'm in New Orleans for a week for any span of time. So that can be a situation for a claimant, and you might be able to catch the claimant in a different parish or a different city, etc. And their vehicle, ask them if they drive a vehicle. You know, do you always drive this vehicle? Do your wife have a vehicle? Do y'all share a vehicle? Is there everybody else that lives in the home that you typically use the vehicle? This can all be very helpful in the long run. Also, medical history. It's important to ask questions about that because it'll let, again, the investigator know kind of where, what types of restrictions that we're looking for to kind of combat or contradict with the surveillance. Lastly, details. Again, it just goes back to kind of when you're speaking with the claimant, almost ask questions like as if you're a 3-year-old, you know, just why, like when, well, when did that happen? Also, another kind of pointer is that when asking these questions, it's important to make the claimant kind of feel comfortable as if it's almost conversational, just to prevent them from getting almost offensive and they start asking why back, like why you're asking me these questions. It just allows for a better chance to get as much information as possible because, you know, as humans, we like to talk, and sometimes if there's any silence, we like to fill that silence. And a lot of times, people will open up and tell you things that you didn't even think to ask. So definitely make the claimant feel comfortable when they're speaking with you.
All righty, and so we'll jump into here for social media. Kind of what is social media, right? It's one of those things where you just kind of know it when you see it, right? There's not been, at least from the legislature, a clear and definitive definition. At least in Louisiana, for example, the Louisiana Department of Agriculture has, surprisingly, has defined social media as sort of this platform where you're able to construct a public or semi-public profile, whereby you have a list of other users with whom you can share a connection within the system, and you can kind of view or navigate their list of connections or interact with them in some capacity, right? But it begs the question, what is social media in the context of something more than just, I know it when I see it, right? Because oftentimes we'll look at social media as the things that we recognize and identify as such, right? Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Those are all things that we look at and automatically think, okay, this is definitely social media. But if we look at, okay, on the broader definition, for example, like if we look at the dictionary definition of social media or something like that, we look at other things like, you know, YouTube, for example, or LinkedIn, you know, Flickr, different things where you can create an account that perhaps aren't as popular, right, as Facebook or Instagram, but they would still theoretically, based upon the definition, be considered social media. And that definition is important because it's determinative of what information we can seek. And so kind of what are these platforms, right? So Facebook, we all know it, a lot of us use it. Instagram, same thing. TikTok, same thing. You know, Twitter, LinkedIn, these are all things that we know for the most part are there, right? If we don't use them, we've heard of them or have used them in the past. But there's others that perhaps are less well known, but are still used, are still social media under the definition. So for example, VSCO, it's a photo sharing platform very similar to Instagram. But if we take the definition of, you know, this public or semi-public profile that allows you to interact with a series of connections, what other apps or platforms that are used could fall under that definition? So for example, Waze, you know, in Waze, you have your profile, you can interact with other users, you can connect with people. That way you can share your ride information with contacts. By definition, theoretically, Waze could be considered a social media platform. Cash App, Venmo, you know, these are fintech apps that allow, you know, money transfers between users. But again, it's consisting of a profile that's either public or semi-public, or such that you can control the privacy settings to determine whether or not it's public, semi-public, or what have you, where you have a list of connections, you can interact within the application with those other connections. And so would those be considered social media in the context of discovery? Maybe. So the argument can certainly be made for it. How about fitness trackers? I mean, for those of you that use, I think it's called Noom or something like that, for example, that's a wearable fitness tracker. That's a similar situation where you have a profile, you can connect with other users, you can share information about your activities, your sleep, things like that. Again, falls under the definition technically of social media, but would it be considered that for purposes of discovery? These are all questions that are important to ask, and so the definition of what social media is tremendously important, right? And so we start with that framework of what is social media, to then come to, okay, what platforms can I look at to see if there's any information there that's useful to my case, right? Because ultimately what we're after here is knowledge. Whether that's beneficial to the case, that's another story, but what we want is the truth, right? That's what we're after.
Kind of piggybacking off of Andres, and with social media is something to kind of also consider is, especially for females, I know a lot of us, we have cycle tracking apps, and also there's some kind of other apps, almost like Instagram or Facebook, where you can connect with like if you're a mother, if you're currently pregnant, or if you're trying to conceive. There's a lot of apps where it's almost public and women are discussing, their health and their pregnancy journey, or their birth journey. These are things that are almost shared on a post board, so it's very open. And I know a lot of women have these apps just for health purposes.
Exactly. And so the next thing you want to look at is, again, we're kind of approaching this holistically, so it's better to go in with a plan than to just sort of throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. And so when we're looking at social media and conducting some surveillance through that, we want to look at the demographics of the individual, right? If they are, using certain social media platforms, well, there are certain individuals that perhaps demographically are more likely to use one social media application than another. If you look at the demographics for example, the average age of the user for Facebook, it's higher than the average age for the user for Instagram. And so, for those of you that remember MySpace, I mean, it's still around, right? I don't know to what capacity, but if we take the average age of the person that is using MySpace now, well, it's probably a little bit higher than Facebook because people used that before. Facebook was around before Instagram, I think. And so the age of the people that use that on average is probably a little bit higher. And so when you're looking at the claimant and saying, okay, is this person, a 21-year-old? Okay, well then I'll probably have a better shot with Instagram or TikTok or Cash App, Venmo, things like that, versus Facebook. If it's somebody that's 50 something, okay, Facebook's probably going to be a good bet. Maybe Pinterest. Those are things that, without kind of going into the studies and everything like that of the demographics, it's just things that we consider and saying, okay, well, I'm looking at this person's this age, what platforms am I going to take off first, right? Maximize the time that I'm spending on each one and being efficient so we get the most amount of information possible. And so what do you do when you're conducting a social media investigation, right? There's a few things to consider. First and foremost, never send them a friend request, right? No matter what social media platform you're on, always be very, very cautious not to like any pictures, send them a friend request or anything like that. The last thing that we want to do, which is kind of calling back the issue of interactions with private investigators, the last thing we want to do is make it seem like that the actions that we're taking are intended specifically to sort of create this illusion of fraud where there is none, right? And so what we want is we want to obtain information of the activities that they're doing organically on their end and not as a result of our intervention or anything like that. So never ever send a friend request to the individual. Get creative, like I said, some things you can find. The internet is a scary place and it's also a very public place. And so I can't tell you how many times I get a claim and I'm looking at it, I'm looking at the medical records and the person saying, I cannot work at all. But then I pull them up on Venmo and their profile is public and I see a litany of transactions that says, for haircut, for this, for X, for Y. That's showing that they're clearly earning an income for some activities. Now, without getting into the admissibility of things or anything like that, that's at least a starting point of saying, okay, well, this is odd, right? That's not what you would normally see from somebody that's saying that they can't work. So get creative. There's going to be things out there, different apps that come up, different things that happen as technology progresses that will make it such that you can get information by thinking outside of the box a little bit. Capture what you find. If the system or the computer that you're using allows access on Facebook, take a screenshot and crop it such that your personal information is not on there, but take a screenshot and keep those things. Send those then to the company that you use for investigations and say, hey, look, conduct a thorough social media search. Here's some things to get you started. That way, if it comes to trial, well, we can call the investigator on the stand and they can provide what they found using your guidance, right? So make sure you're capturing what you find so that when that assignment gets sent out, you can say, look, this is what I'm seeing. A, so that we can kind of position it to be admissible, and B, so that we can keep track and say, okay, did they delete anything? More and more plaintiffs' attorneys are telling their clients nowadays, look, delete your social media profile, deactivate them of the privacy settings, do what you need to do, but make sure that they can't see it, right? And so the sooner we do it, if we're able to get in there before they're given this advice, then we're more likely to capture something. And if they do delete it, well, now we have an argument, okay, well, is there a spoliation issue that we need to address? It just opens the door for more defenses. So make sure you capture what you find. Talk to the employer, talk to the co-workers or the boss, or try to get information. Are any of them friends with the person on Facebook or Instagram or whatever social media platform, right? Can they see their posts if this is private? There have been several instances where co-workers have come out and said, hey, this person's posting on this, talking about how they have a new job. I thought they couldn't work, so they're not coming back. And that employer the boss calls the adjuster and says, hey, so-and-so's telling me that this guy's working. And then we're able to kind of uncover information through that avenue as well. So ask, the employer, hey, do you know if any of their co-workers or supervisors are friends with Facebook on it, or are friends with the claimant on any of these social media platforms? Again, get creative, right? That the goal here is to gather information. Information is power, and so the more creative you get and the more we can gather information, the better it is. I'll give you an example of something that's typically not thought of, but that can yield good information. For those of you that have claims that are older than or early 2020 or perhaps a little bit older, PPP loans, right? That was a huge issue not that long ago, where it was found that a lot of people were applying for PPP loans that shouldn't have been because they didn't own businesses X, Y, and Z. But I can tell you that on at least 2 instances, I have found people that have said that they can't work and are not earning any income, but applied for a PPP loan. And so if I'm looking at it and saying, okay, well, your accident happened in 2019, and for the last 3 years, you said that you can't work, but you're applying for a PPP loan saying that you own this particular kind of business and lost this amount of money, well, that suggests that clearly you were making money, own a business, and are able to work. And so not only is that one avenue, but that also might reveal, okay, well then, does that business have social media platforms, right? And so thinking about those things, thinking outside the box. The Louisiana Secretary of State, for example, business filing searches in Louisiana are free. So if you go to the Louisiana Secretary of State website, you can search business filings, you can search under an individual's name, and it'll pull up all of the organizations that that person is affiliated with from an ownership or managerial standpoint, meaning if it's an LLC, if they're a member or manager of it, if it's really anything that they filed, right? If they're an officer in some type of corporation. So, you know, some of these claimants, they might own a business and that business is registered with the Secretary of State, that it might be active, it might not, but again, it gives you another stepping stone to get additional information. So getting creative with that is gonna allow you to gather as much information as possible. And this is stuff that can be done, you know, we're taking a good bit of time in talking about it now, but you can do this kind of pretty quickly, right? And so thinking about those things, you're looking at social media profiles. It's really easy to change your name on social media, right? Less than a minute. On at least 2 occasions, I have found claimants that instead of using their first name and last name, at some point after the accident, changed it to their middle name and maiden name. Generally, attorneys for the plaintiffs, they will tell them, look, get off of social media. Realistically, social media is, and there's been plenty of studies on the release of dopamine and everything like that, but there is an addiction aspect to social media. So a lot of people either don't want to or can't let go of social media. They'll say, oh yeah, my attorney told me this, but I don't really want to. I want to keep up. I want to see what's going on. That kind of fear of missing out deal. And so let me just go ahead and change my name because they're not going to find me that way, right? Well, if you get creative and you look at those things, you might be able to. So I can't tell you how many times I've been unable to find a claimant, and I'll give you an example here in a little bit, because they changed their name. And so I'm trying to find it with their first and last name. I can't find it, middle name, maiden name, any name that I can find for them, I can't find them. Well, I find their emergency contact in the medical records. I pull up, I'm able to find their emergency contact on any social media platform. And it's through them that I'm able to find the claimant and notice how they've changed their name and everything like that to be harder to find. And so getting creative with it and doing those things is really going to help you gather information. And so being able to identify them on social media is very important, again, to see if they're doing anything that's contrary to what they're reporting. Getting pictures of them, for example, if the employer has any IDs, right, and they take pictures, something like that, something that you can go off and say, hey, employer, do you have a picture of the claimant? So you can look at it and say, okay, if their name is John Smith, there's going to be a lot of John Smiths. Well, you now have the picture that you can cross-reference to however many profiles you find for that particular person. And again, when we're talking about a holistic approach, when you're building those things, if you have their address, well, you know what city they're located in, and you can narrow your search. So while there may be a lot of John Smiths in the United States, I'll tell you, there's not going to be that many John Smiths in Lafayette, Louisiana, right? So if you know their city, then you can narrow it by search that way and kind of start shrinking it a little bit, right? If you know their phone number, there are plenty of free reverse phone lookup apps that you can type in a phone number. It'll tell you who it's registered to. Is it a business, right? Is it the name of an individual? If it's the name of a different individual, what relation do they have to them? Again, we're looking at a holistic approach, and so we're trying to get information from all these different areas to come and get a clearer picture of what the reality is versus what's simply being reported.
Kind of piggybacking off Andres and his holistic approach, and just, pictures of the claimant, what the claimant kind of looks like, just so you can identify them, and, comparing the names, and if they're using, even a nickname, or I know a lot of girls for some reason like to use their first name and their middle name as like for their social media profiles. But kind of knowing if the claimant, again, maybe this is more nuanced to women, is knowing kind of hairstyles. Does the claimant typically change their hair? You know, you may be looking for somebody who's a blonde, but you know, maybe the week after her hair is purple. So just those little, like looking at those little details and knowing those little details, like, oh, just be aware that, like, you know, the claimant would typically show up to work with different, like drastically different hairstyles. So just kind of something to keep in mind.
And so you can see right here on the presentation, and again, if anybody can't see it, please shoot us an email. We'll be happy to send it to you. But this was an instance where I was able to find a claimant through the emergency contact, which was her fiance, because essentially her name on social media had nothing to do with her real name, right? It was all one word, Big Fine Mama, and then the first name of the claimant, right? And so I'm looking with her first and last name, her first and maiden name, her middle name and maiden name, her middle name and last name, her middle or her first and middle name. I'm going through all of the different combinations I can think of with those names, but obviously I'm not going to think of that nickname or what have you. And so using the tools that you have at your disposal will make it easier to find the individuals that you're looking for. And so a couple of tips here, again, without going too deep into the admissibility of any of the information that you gather. Start looking at those things. Go into the different social media platforms. And look, sometimes I have to do these things on my phone, right? Because I don't know if Venmo, I can access it from my computer, right? It's an app. I look at it through the app, right? That's where I have to look at it, right? Cash App, right? The sole reason for my use of Cash App is to try to find people that way, right? Instagram, it's a lot easier to look in your phone than on the computer. Same thing for TikTok. It's easier for me to look at for people on the computer with Facebook than on my phone. So it's going to change. So when you're going through all this information, you're capturing as much as you can, taking screenshots, taking screen recordings if you need to scroll up on your phone because there's a lot of posts about what they're doing. You know, if you're on the Louisiana Secretary of State website, just hit print and save as PDF if there's a business registered to their name, because then that business might have a social media platform. Capturing all of that and sending it to the SIU team or the private investigator and saying, look, conduct a social media search. This is what I have on them. So now you know their profiles. Capture these same things that I have already captured and look for anything else that you can find. Because that way, if the case goes to trial, we have a way to overcome admissibility objections by using the investigator and their retrieval of this information to kind of argue to get it in. Be specific with your request. Like I said, tell them, look, here's what I have found. You need to capture this same thing, right? And more, if there is any, right? If there is nothing else and they just capture the same thing that you capture, again, you're considering the defense of it and the case down the road. If it does go to trial, can we use this evidence that we've collected, that you've set aside the time? And look, everybody, you know, has a significant amount of cases. You know, you're busy, you're getting however many new cases a day because of this accident and that accident. You're trying to schedule a recorded statement here and there and everywhere else. And so it's certainly not something that's as easily applied as it is said. And so just keep in mind that not only are the SIU teams and the private investigators at your disposal, but we are as well. And so if you find that you've got a new claimant and you're like, you know, I really just don't have the time to look and see what I can find on them, here, SIU team, PI, attorney, y'all handle this for me and see what you can find, because that's ultimately all these groups and all these people are there to support you in your claims handling, right? And so take advantage of those things. And then remember the follow-ups. I can't tell you how many times I get a claim, I look on social media and I find a bunch of things, right? I remember one specific instance where The person was talking about how they were doing taxes for people. Okay, well, this particular claimant was referring to these people as her clients, all the while saying that she's incapable of any work whatsoever. And I continued to follow up on that profile, and it became a situation where you had a pretty good timeline of, I'm doing people's taxes. I have now applied for a license and a certificate. I'm now also doing taxes for people in Texas. And so you kind of go through these timeline where you can say, okay, you're doing all these different things and taking all these different steps to earn income and collect from your clients for services that you're rendering to them, all the while saying that you're unable to work. And so creating those follow-ups, it doesn't have to be weekly, but occasionally go back in there and see, okay, is there anything in there that can help further my case? And again, you want to get creative. At the end of the day, technology is going to advance the way technology advances. New apps and new things are going to come up. And look, I'm not familiar with all the different social media apps that the younger generation uses nowadays. Sometimes I hear of some and I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. There was one for a little while called Kik, I think, K-I-K. Snapchat, don't use it, don't care to use it, particularly because it serves no purpose for me, right? As far as I know, it's just a quick little snapshot of an image, and there's all these other things that are kind of a little bit more sensitive with regards to that. But these new apps come up that people are going to start using. And so there might be information there. And so to the extent that it's useful in your claims handling, it's worth understanding that they exist because it may provide some information later on. I have found people, claimants that have a SoundCloud account for their music that I was able to correlate to a YouTube account for that particular band that showed videos of them playing a show when they're saying that they can't, stand up for an extended period of time, and then they are playing a 30-minute show, playing the guitar or whatever. And so getting creative with those things and saying, well, what are they using, right? This VSCO app. Yeah, VSCO app. Again, I didn't know this existed until relatively recently, and I have not found anybody on that, but I'm not excluding or ignoring it because I know that that's becoming a more popular app. And so keeping those things in mind and considering those things is going to be important. And getting creative, again, the PPP loans, Secretary of State websites, these are all things that are at your disposal, are at your fingertips, are free, that might give you an insight into resolving these issues. And so that's it for me. I don't know if Taylor has anything.
Just kind of piggybacking off of getting creative, one thing to consider is if the claimant has a teenager in the household that lives with them, if the teenager has TikTok, I know a lot of times what's popular is teenagers doing TikToks with their parents sometimes. So you never know, you might catch the claimant, doing a little TikTok dance with their kids. So that's also something to consider is, how active is, their teenager or college student on social media, and, are they linked on any photos or tagged in any photos or videos, etc.
Yeah, and so if, like I said, if y'all have any questions or anything like that, please feel free to let us know. Again, my email is my first and last name, Andres Gomez, all together at parkerlandry.com. And Taylor's is her first and last name, Taylor Doming, all together at parkerlandry.com. Please feel free to email us with any questions or any concerns that you may have. If you have, a particular claimant that comes up and you're not particularly sure, you kind of have this gut feeling that there's something out there, but you can't quite pinpoint it, and you want to talk about it or whatever, any questions you may have, please feel free to reach out to any of us. Or if you know Patrick or Mike or Corey or Megan or Keith, feel free to reach out to any of us. Like I said, we're here to help. So with that being said, I hope everybody has a wonderful day, and we are here if you need anything.
Thanks.